They told you Africa had no religion, that before the arrival of foreign books and prophets, the people of the continent wandered in spiritual darkness, chanting to trees, bowing to stones, and fearing shadows. They told you African spirituality was primitive, demonic, tribal chaos disguised as belief, that our ancestors knew nothing of God, that salvation had to be delivered by ships and scriptures. They taught us to be ashamed of the drum, afraid of the masquerade, suspicious of our grandmother's rituals. But what they never told you, what they refused to teach, is that African spirituality is one of the oldest, most profound, and most sophisticated spiritual systems on the planet. They never told you that, long before there was a Bible or Quran, Africans were already communing with the divine through elements, dreams, symbols, nature, vibration, and memory. That we had names for the source: Olodumare, Chukwu, Nyame, Amma, Modimo, not as myths, but as philosophies of existence. That the ancestors were not dead, but transformed. That spirit did not live in temples alone, but in wind, in earth, in the rhythm of life itself. They never told you we had laws, spiritual laws, not written on stone tablets, but etched in rituals, proverbs, and taboos. And that our gods were not idols. They were principles of cosmic order, forces that govern rain, justice, fertility, death, and rebirth. They also never told you that when the colonizers arrived, they didn't just enslave the body, they targeted the soul, they burned shrines, outlawed rituals, replaced ancestral wisdom with European theology. They stripped away language, distorted memory, and turned our spirituality into a crime. And when they were done, they made us believe it was our own backwardness that had been removed. They made us call our gods demons, our ancestors devils, our rituals madness. And so, entire generations were raised without the knowledge of who they truly were. But today, that silence breaks. Today, we pull back the curtain, not to worship blindly, but to understand deeply, to unearth the full story of African spirituality, what it is, how it works, why it was erased, and why it's returning. This is not just a lesson, it's a remembrance, a remembering of what your bones already know. African spirituality is not gone, it is not dead, it was hidden, and now it is rising. Long before the concept of religion existed, before anyone ever spoke of prophets or scriptures or commandments, African people were already in conversation with the divine, not through holy books, but through earth, through wind, through fire, through blood. The earliest humans walked the continent barefoot, not just in survival, but in sacred connection. They understood something modern minds have forgotten. That spirit is not found in buildings alone, but in all living things. African spirituality was never created. It was revealed. It emerged from watching the stars, from listening to rivers, from dancing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world itself. When people say Africa had no religion, they misunderstand what Africa had. Africa didn't need religion. It had relationship. A living, breathing relationship between the seen and the unseen, between the living and the dead, between humans and the forces that shape reality. Spirituality was not a separate part of life, it was life. Every birth was sacred, every death was a passage, every tree had a spirit, every season was a message. There was no need for conversion. The divine was already here. From the Nubians of the Nile to the Khoisan of the south, from the Nok of Nigeria to the ancient shrines of Benin and Dahomey, African spiritual systems developed not in isolation, but in deep dialogue with their surroundings. Ancestors were honored not because of superstition, but because memory itself was power. Nature was not feared, it was studied. Spirits were not begged, they were negotiated with. And the divine was not a man in the sky, it was the rhythm of life itself, flowing through all things. What many people do not realize is that these systems gave birth to civilization. The very concept of kingship, justice, law, and cosmic order in Africa came from spiritual principles. Mayhat and Kemet taught balance, truth, and reciprocity thousands of years before any religion codified them. The Dogon's understanding of the stars, the Yoruba's complex Orisha system, the Igbo's deep cosmology, all emerged from spiritual observation and transmission. These were not fragments of culture. They were blueprints of how to live, how to die, how to return. Before religion divided the world, African spirituality united it. Through the soil, through spirit, through story. To understand African spirituality is to step into a world where nothing is random and everything is alive. The divine was not confined to a single figure in the clouds. It was a living system, a complex architecture where gods, spirits, ancestors, nature, and humanity existed in deep interconnection. In African cosmology, the divine was layered. It had order, it had structure, and it had balance. The highest being was often untouchable, vast, silent, not regularly invoked. But beneath that source were channels, manifestations of its power made accessible to human beings. These were the deities, the spirits, the forces, not idols to be worshipped blindly, but intelligences to be understood. In Yoruba thought, the supreme being is Olodumare, the source of Ase, the divine force that animates the universe. Olodumare does not descend, he empowers. His work flows through the Orisha, divine forces who govern aspects of nature and human life. There is Sango, god of thunder and justice, Oshun, goddess of love, rivers, fertility, Ogun, god of iron and transformation. Each Orisha is not just a personality, but a principle, a doorway to understanding the balance of creation. In Igbo belief, Chukwu is the supreme source, and through him flows Chi, the personal god, the spark of purpose in every human being. Chi is both divine and individual, a reminder that no one is born without destiny. Among the Akan, Nyame is the sky god, the creator who works through the Abazum, spiritual intermediaries who manage the forces of rain, fertility, death, birth, and healing. The Dogon speak of Amma, who birthed the cosmos through vibration and rhythm, and the Nomo, ancestral spirits who maintain cosmic order. In southern Africa, Modomo is the supreme force above all, while ancestors serve as the messengers who help guide human affairs. These systems were not polytheistic in the Western sense. African spirituality is not about worshiping many gods. It is about understanding the many aspects of one vast and living source. Every force had its balance. Fire needed water. Chaos needed structure. Masculine needed feminine. Each ritual, each sacrifice, each prayer was designed to restore harmony, to correct imbalance, to realign the spirit with the cosmic flow. African spirituality teaches that when balance is broken, sickness follows, not just in the body, but in families, in land, in society. The gods do not punish, they reflect. And when the world spins out of order, they send signs, not to destroy, but to guide us back. This divine architecture is not superstition, it is spiritual science, a blueprint for a life in rhythm with the universe itself. In African spirituality, death is not an ending, it is a return, a passage, a homecoming to a dimension where time folds and memory becomes breath. The ancestors are not gone, they are not silent, they walk with us, speak through us, correct us, protect us. They are not merely honored out of tradition, they are active participants in life, standing between the living and the divine. In many African cultures, it is said that to forget the dead is to become lost yourself, because the ancestors are not behind you, they are beneath you, holding the roots you walk on, watching everything. Among the Igbo, they are called Ndi Ichie, the wise ones. Among the Yoruba, Egungun, the collective spirit of the ancestors who return through masked dancers, moving between worlds. Among the Akan, the dead are the Nsamanfo, who return in dreams and are honored through libation and lineage. Across the continent, the belief remains the same. The dead are not dead. They are elevated, and they have work to do. The ancestors hold memory, not just personal, but spiritual. They remember who you are when you forget. They carry the contracts your soul signed before birth. They understand the patterns in your blood that stretch back generations. And when you stray from your path, they come. sometimes as intuition, sometimes as warning, sometimes as illness that no doctor can explain. Their goal is not to harm you, it is to realign you. In African spirituality, it is not uncommon for people to dream of their grandmother days before something life-changing happens, or to find themselves instinctively pouring drink on the ground for the ancestors, even if they cannot fully explain why. That is not culture alone, that is spiritual muscle memory. Your bones remember what your mind may have forgotten, because the ancestors live in you, in your face, in your fear, in your courage, in your gift. But they must be honored, federal, spoken to, not in fear, but in gratitude. You cannot walk forward if you dishonor those who laid the ground behind you. The libation poured is not a superstition. It is a technology, a reconnection, a coded ritual that reminds the world, I remember, I honor, I belong. To know African spirituality is to know that no one truly walks alone. The living are never unaccompanied, the dead are never truly silent, and as long as we remember them, the ancestors will always lead us home. In African spirituality, the divine does not live in far-off realms beyond human reach. Spirit walks the earth. The wind is not just air, the river is not just water, the tree is not just wood. Each holds life, each carries memory, and each is part of a sacred system of balance governed by ritual and law. For our ancestors, the world was not a backdrop. It was alive, intelligent, speaking constantly. And if you wanted to survive, to prosper, to stay aligned, you had to learn how to listen. Ritual was not a performance. It was technology, spiritual, biological, cosmic. A way of opening doors between dimensions, of calling the ancestors, feeding the gods, and healing the unseen. There were rituals for birth, for naming, for puberty, for marriage, for war, for death. Ritual was a calendar of the soul. It reminded people not just who they were, but when they were. It kept time with the universe. Every mask, every drum, every chant had a function, a frequency, a consequence. Nature was the temple. Mountains were shrines, forests held secrets, rivers were mothers. Lightning was the voice of judgment. In Yoruba tradition, sacred groves are living sanctuaries where Orisha dwell, untouched, undesecrated, alive. In Igbo land, the python was protected, not because it was feared, but because it was seen as a spirit guide of the goddess Idemili. Among the Zulu, the ancestors live in the land, and the earth is consulted in moments of conflict or change. Sacredness was not abstract. It was physical. It had place. And it had rules. Those rules were known as spiritual law, not laws written on scrolls, but embedded in nature, in taboo, in proverb, in tradition. These laws governed conduct, shaped character, and protected balance. You could not take without offering. You could not kill without reason. You could not break an oath without consequence. And if you violated these laws, no king, no priest, no charm could protect you. Because the gods did not punish like men, they corrected like nature. What the colonizers called primitive superstition was actually a network of encoded truths, metaphysical blueprints that kept communities in harmony with the divine. African spirituality teaches that you are not just a person, you are part of a system. And when you walk out of alignment, the whole system feels it. That's why ritual matters. That's why nature is sacred. That's why law is spiritual. To be spiritual in the African sense is to walk in rhythm, with the land, with the ancestors, with the gods, with yourself. When the colonizers came, they did not come only for land. They came for the spirit. They did not arrive with just swords and guns. They brought crosses, doctrines, and holy books. They studied the rituals of the people, not to understand, but to dismantle. They watched the dancers, not with wonder, but with fear. And they saw something terrifying in what Africa had. Not savagery, but sovereignty. Not ignorance, but power. The power to define the world without Europe. And that they could not allow. So they called our gods demons. They called our ancestors devils. They called our ceremonies witchcraft. They passed laws against drumming. They outlawed sacred festivals. They burned shrines and replaced them with churches built on the same soil, sometimes using the same wood. They cut the drum and handed the people a hymn. They broke the calabash and gave them a chalice. They stripped away the names of deities, of ancestors, of places, and replaced them with saints, sacraments, and foreign tongues. What they feared was not religion, it was memory, because memory is power. If a people can remember who they were before they were colonized, they can rise. If a people know how they used to speak to the divine, they can question the version of God they were handed. So, colonialism didn't just enslave bodies, it disoriented spirits. It taught us to bow to heaven while fearing our roots. It taught us to reject the ancestors who bore us, to renounce the rituals that protected us, and to forget the names that once called lightning, rain, and justice from the sky. But the most violent act was psychological. They made us ashamed. They turned the drumbeat of our ancestors into something to hide. They made the traditional priest a madman, the herbalist a criminal, the shrine a cursed place. And we, their children, began to whisper our own names. We began to doubt our own voices. We looked to the sky and forgot that we had once spoken directly to it. Yet even through the fire, the spirits remained. The songs survived in coded lullabies. The gods hid behind saints. The ancestors entered dreams. And the rituals whispered through generations, waiting, not to be resurrected, but to be remembered. African spirituality was not destroyed. It was buried, and now it rises. The silence is breaking, slowly, powerfully. Not with fireworks, but with memory. Not with rage, but with rhythm. All over the world, descendants of Africa are dreaming again. Not just sleeping dreams, but spiritual recall. Children born with names they never learned. Women dancing steps they never rehearsed. Men hearing drum patterns in their bones that no school ever taught them. Something is stirring, something ancient, something divine. The ancestors are returning, not from the grave, but from the place we buried them in our minds. You see it in the festivals once feared, now revived. In the altars being rebuilt, not to replace faith, but to restore balance. In the young ones asking questions their elders were too afraid to voice. You see it in the rise of herbal medicine, ancestral veneration, Orisha worship, reincarnation studies, African astrology, and sacred drumming. The forgotten ways are being found again, not as museum artifacts, but as living systems. Spirit is walking again. This reawakening is not rebellion. It is remembrance. It is not rejection of other paths. It is the return to the path that was interrupted. The ancestors are not angry. They are ready. They are ready to teach, to guide, to correct, to bless. But only if we are ready to listen. Ready to unlearn the lies, ready to walk again with our feet in the soil and our eyes in the sky. This isn't just a trend. This is a return. This is spiritual gravity pulling a people back into alignment with their source. The gods have waited long enough. The spirits are speaking louder. The earth is asking for reconnection. And the children of Africa, at home and abroad, are finally ready to remember what they were never truly meant to forget. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the return. They never taught you that your people once spoke to fire, and it answered, that your ancestors could summon rain, interpret dreams, walk between worlds, and return. They never taught you that your rituals held mathematics, that your dances were maps of the spirit world, that your prayers once shaped reality itself. They never taught you that you came from a lineage of spiritual scientists, philosophers, healers, mediums, and mystics, long before any foreign god arrived on your soil. They wanted you to believe that salvation had to be imported, that holiness wore only robes from Rome or Arabia, that power came from rejecting your blood. But here's what they couldn't erase. Truth leaves echoes. And if you listen closely, in your dreams, in your body, in your fear and fire, you will hear them. The echoes of those who came before you, the ones who held the sky open with their prayers, the ones who never stopped walking with you, even when you forgot their names. What they never taught you is that African spirituality is not a relic of the past. It is a mirror of what you could still become. It is a system not of superstition, but of alignment, of rhythm, of justice, of healing, of balance. You do not have to abandon all you've learned, but you must remember what was taken, because your roots are not lost, they are buried, and they are still alive. So, start where you are. Light a candle, pour a libation, speak to your grandmother's name, ask your spirit to remember. Open your palms and listen. The ancestors are not waiting for perfect words. They are waiting for sincerity, for return, for recognition. Because when you remember them, they remember you. And when you walk their path again, the earth, the sky, and your own soul will begin to align. If this story awakens something ancient inside you, don't let it fade. Like this video, share it, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who was never taught, but deeply needs to remember.